Let's talk about Dolphins at Daybreak. So this book kicks off with Jack realizing that he has had a dream about Morgan, telling him to come back to the treehouse. And he's like, God, I just really wish that dreams were real. And then Annie bursts into his room and she's like, I had a dream about Morgan. We must depart for the treehouse. There's no indication of how much time has passed since they turned her back into human from mouse. So I'm curious how much time has passed, but unclear. They head over to the treehouse and Morgan's like, hey, so Merlin is kind of being a dick. So I'm going to need you guys to do my job for me because I have to be in Camelot. And the kids are like, okay, great. She goes, but you have to be a master librarian. So then they're like, oh no, we're not master librarians. Until she goes, well, you could be if you solve 4 riddles. So we've gone from child endangerment to child labor. So that's great. She hands them over a scroll as well as an ocean guide. And she's like, you have to solve this riddle, have fun. They end up on the beach, not sure where. And the riddle is, rough and gray as rock, I'm plain as plain can be, but hidden deep inside, there's great beauty in me. What am I? Jack reads in the guide that they are on a coral reef and that it's just millions of little skeletons. And so he writes that into his journal. At this point, Annie has gotten out of the treehouse and she's, doing her thing, exploring. And she calls Jack over and she's like, look at what I found. And it's a mini sub. She's like, we should go in this. And Jack, for the first time in the first time in 9 books, he's like, well, we can't because it's not ours. So we can't use it. And Annie always does this thing. And I've noticed that this is one of her favorite vocab words, which is teeny. She's like, just a teeny peek, just for a teeny minute. And it truly is so annoying. It triggers me, honestly, every time she says it. Jack is like, okay, fine. We can get in, but don't touch anything. Also, as they were leaving the house in the morning, their parents were like, it's really early, where are you going? And they were both like, we're going on a walk. And so the parents told them it had rained the day before, so they needed to keep their shoes and socks dry. And so when they're getting into the sub, Jack is like, but we need to leave our shoes and socks behind because they have to stay dry. And Annie's like, you're so right. They get into the sub. Annie immediately starts touching buttons. And Jack is like, this is the worst thing you've actually ever done. He calls her out and he's like, you don't understand the ramifications of this. We're in a sub in the ocean and we don't have any control. She's like, yeah, but just look out the window. It's so beautiful. Aren't you happy that we're here? And Jack has this moment where he's like, yeah, it is really beautiful. And I am really happy that I'm here. And this is such a cool experience. But also he is constantly reminded of the fact that this is not their sub and that they're in uncharted waters. Jack ends up giving her a little tour of the ocean floor because he is the one that's reading the book. So he's pointing things out where he's like, this is this, this is this. They come up on some dolphins and Annie decides to befriend them by naming them. I think their names are Suki and Sam. Yes, giving them kisses through the glass. And at this point, Jack sees that the submarine has a log. So he goes to the travel log or whatever. And Annie's like, oh my God, it's your little notebook. But in the travel log, they learn that the submarine is actually broken and there's tons of cracks in the glass. And the reason that it was just hanging out on the reef is because it was going to be picked up for a junkyard. So they are now underwater in a broken submarine that's cracking. And it's giving Titanic submersible. As they realize that they can just press a button that has waves on it and they will head back up to shore, they are stopped by an octopus, and the octopus clambers on to the little sub. And Annie's like, oh my gosh, you're so cute. But Jack does his little research in the book and he realizes that the tentacles are strong enough to crack the rest of the glass. So Annie's like, oh my gosh, octopus, it would be so cool if you left. Please, please, please. And Jack's like, we need to be a little bit more stern because this is actually pretty dire. And he's basically like, get the fuck out. The octopus releases a bunch of its ink and Annie's like, you hurt its feelings. How dare you? And Jack is like, I don't care at this moment because I'm reading this book and it says that the octopus will spray ink if a shark is around. Lo and behold, they turn around, hammerhead shark. At this point, the submarine has finally made it up to land, which is great because the water is apparently up to their knees at this point. And Jack and Annie are both like, oh shoot, we're gonna have to swim for it. And there's this little line, which is a callback to the Arctic book where Annie's like, well, thank God we took swim lessons at the Y. They get out into the water and Jack has read that if there's a shark around, if you swim calmly without splashing a lot, then the shark won't come near you. So they both start swimming and they're trying to be calm about it. Jack turns and he sees a fin in the background. And so he's like, okay, I'm not going to tell Annie because that'll just freak her out more. I'm just going to keep swimming and I'll swim a little bit faster because at the end of the day, these two are siblings, which means that they are competitive. So yes, they are swimming for their lives, but also they're going to be in a little bit of a race. There's even a line where it's like at one point Annie even started swimming faster than Jack, so Jack had to swim faster too. So they start getting really, really tired, and Jack's like, all of my bones feel heavy, I'm exhausted, let's start floating just to like catch our breath. But the longer that they float, the more tired they actually end up getting. And they keep saying that like they keep going towards the treehouse, but the treehouse seems like it's not getting any closer. So they're drowning, basically. It is at this moment that the two dolphins that Annie befriended do show up, and they end up taking them back to shore. We get back to the treehouse and they're like, well, I guess that's it. Time to go home. Jack's like, my notebook is soggy. The book is soggy. We've definitely failed. Annie also just like kind of admits defeat. I think she's just tired, honestly, because when you see her in this next illustration, she looks like she has lived 100 lives. She steps on an oyster and she's like, ow, excuse you, because they've been on this reef the whole time. And so they realize that the oyster is the answer to the riddle because it's gray and unassuming on the outside, and on the inside there could be a pearl. So they get back into the treehouse, and there's like the scroll that Morgan had given them, and it's like, you've won, you're correct, it's an oyster. And they're like, hooray. They go back home and they're still just like soaking wet. And he's like, we should solve another riddle. And Jack is like, no, I'm going home and I need to get out of these wet clothes and I need to dry off. And Annie's like, you know what? Valid. So they start walking back home, and they never got to see the pearl in the oyster. They just had to believe that it was there because the oyster wouldn't like open. And so Annie's like, maybe the pearl was the dolphins and the adventure we had along the way. Jack makes a little bit of a comment where he's like, you know, we could have figured out the oyster thing way earlier if we had just stayed on the reef. Like, we did not need to go into the submersible. And Annie's like, yeah, but didn't we have fun? Didn't we have such a great time? And Jack is like, we almost died in a submersible. We got chased by a shark. But then he goes, but swimming with the dolphins made up for all of it. When they get home, their parents like don't even look up from whatever they're doing, don't see that their kids are just like sopping wet from head to toe. And they're like, did you keep your shoes dry? And the kids are like, yes. I would say that these kids are definitely not traumatized in the least on this cover. They look like they're having quite a fun time. Get your cowboy hats because tomorrow we are going to a ghost town at sundown. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you had a fun time, and I'll see you tomorrow. Let's talk about Ghost Town at sundown. New lore drop about Jack and Annie's house is that it has a porch, because the book starts out with them sitting on the porch enjoying their day. And then suddenly Annie's like, I just saw a rabbit, so we should go to the tree house. Jack is like, what? And she's like, yeah, it's a sign, we should go. Because of Annie's magical intuition, she is correct, and Morgan is waiting for them at the treehouse. And Jack is like, how you doing, girl? And she's like, honestly, dude, not too great. Like, Merlin is still on my ass and I can barely get my job done. But you guys have like 3 more riddles to solve, so here you go. This time they're going to the Wild Wild West. They end up in a place called Rattlesnake Flats, which is a ghost town in the 1800s. I think it's like 1860 or something. The riddle is, out of the blue, my lonely voice calls out to you. Who am I? Am I? They're kind of like looking around. They hear a little rattling and they look over. They take one look at a rattlesnake and bolt. They're like, I guess that's why it's called Rattlesnake Flat. They head into a saloon and Annie finds them hats and boots. And Jack is once again like, these aren't ours. And Annie goes, I know, just try them on. The hat is super dusty and it definitely activates Jack's like asthma because he is sneezing like the rest of the book. She finds them boots, which Jack finds incredibly uncomfortable, and he keeps trying to find times throughout the book to take his boots off and keeps getting interrupted. And so his feet are uncomfortable this entire book, and I find that hilarious. They're looking around and then they hear a piano in the distance, and they're like, that's crazy. I thought this was a ghost town. We thought we were the only ones here. They head over to the piano and the piano is like playing itself. And Annie's like, I don't fuck with ghosts. No, thank you. And Jack is like, but we literally saw one when we were at the pyramid in Egypt. And she goes, yeah, but that was ancient Egypt. What does that mean? They are about to explore a little bit more when they start to see figures out in the distance, and it is horse thieves coming through with a bunch of horses. 2 kids hide in some barrels, and while they're hiding, they hear that the horse thieves have stolen a mother horse, and the baby horse then is looking for the mother. The thieves go and camp out, and the kids are really sad about the fact that the mom and baby were separated. And Jack's like, yeah, but we can't really like do anything about it. And then Annie goes, but the baby horse is like right there. What proceeds is Jack doing the research to figure out how to tame a wild Mustang, while Annie uses her magical intuition to tame the wild Mustang baby regardless. I think they name him Sunset. They're like, oh, what a sweet little horse. How are we going to like handle this problem, right? And then somebody's like, put your hands up. Turns out it's this like cowboy Mustang wrangler called Slim, and he nicknames Annie Smiley and Jack Shorty. He's like, you're the two smallest horse thieves I've ever seen. And they're like, no, we would literally never steal anything. Really? Because I have 9 other books saying otherwise, as well as the boots on your frickin' feet. They explain that they saw the other thieves going through, and Slim like immediately believes them. And they're like, oh my gosh, can we come with you while you go and get the horses? And this like grown man is like, oh my God, sure. That would be so fun. Come along. I can't tell if he's doing it because he doesn't want the kids to be left alone, or if he's doing it because he doesn't care about the fact that he's like endangering these children. You know what I mean? So they ride out into the distance. Night has fallen. Slim tells Annie that she has to stay with the baby horse, and then he takes Jack with him to go and get the other horses from the thieves, and Jack has to like watch Dusty, which is Slim's horse. Jack uses all of the horse training that he has learned in the book to keep Dusty quiet so that Slim can go like get the horses. And then he hears like chaos and commotion. And then the next thing he knows, all of the horses are running by because Slim has freed all of them. And Slim's like, come on, we gotta go. And so Jack is just like on Dusty alone and suddenly learns how to ride a horse at top speed. Also, at this point, the thieves have like obviously woken up and they're like, they're stealing our horses that we stole. And they're like, bang, 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 bang. And I'm like, oh my God. I know it's the Wild West, but he's 8 years old, okay? This experience, though, really like does something to Jack where the second that they get back with Annie, he's like acting immediately like he's a cowboy. He's like, this is my life now. He's saying partner. He's like, yup, partner. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, where are we taking these horses, boss? What? And Slim is like, we're going to take them to this place called Blue Ridge. So they end up camping and spending the night at Blue Ridge. So these kids, like, this is their longest mission yet. And Slim tells them ghost stories about this guy named Lonesome Luke, who he was like in love with this girl in the Wild West, but she was like, this is not for me. And she headed back east. And then he like died mysteriously in the desert a year later. And now he like comes back and plays piano. Interesting. So now that they have successfully reunited the mother and son horses, Annie calls after them as they're heading back out into the wild, and she's like, goodbye. And then they hear an echo of her going, bye, bye, bye. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's an echo. The answer to the riddle is echo. And Slim's like, I knew you guys would figure it out. And so Jack starts like writing down the answer. And Slim is like, what are you doing? And Annie's like, Jack likes to write things down. And then Slim goes, I like to write things down too. I always wanted to write a book. And I'm like, oh my God, he's the author of the book that they're reading, right? And he's like, you should do that. And Jack's like, we like books. And so Slim's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to quit my life as a Mustang wrangler and I'm going to go out to this other town and I'm going to write a book. And Jack's like, you should write about the Wild West. And Slim's like, oh, you're so right, little 8-year-old. I should do that. Thank you so much. He drops them back off at the town. And Slim's like, I'll see y'all again. Like, cowboys never forget. And like all this stuff. And then he like rides off into the distance. And then the kids go back to the treehouse. They get back home and they start to like put everything away. And this is when Annie sees that Slim's name is on the cover of the book and that he was the author of the book that they were using. He dedicated the book to Shorty and Smiley, Jack and Annie. And he's like, 2 strangers who changed my life. And I'm like, buddy, you need to make like adult friends. The book ends with Jack and Annie's dad calling for them because it's time for dinner, because no time has passed, obviously, since they left the treehouse, even though they have spent an entire night and morning in the Wild West. I would say these kids look pretty traumatized on this cover. I wouldn't say like full traumatized, but they do look definitely scared. Prep yourself for tomorrow because we're going to hang out with some lions. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a fun time, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Let's talk about lions at lunchtime. So Jack and Annie are heading back from the grocery store and they have bought a jar of peanut butter, a loaf of bread, honey. So they're fully stocked. They see an animal that they're like, that animal does not belong in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. And then Annie goes, oh my God, it must be a sign from Morgan. We need to get back to the treehouse. They head over into the treehouse and they're like, where's Morgan? And she kind of like appears out of the dark. And she's like, do you still want to become master librarians? And they're like, yeah, of course. Like, we're already halfway through. And then she's like, all right, fine. Here's, like your scroll and you're heading to Africa. And this is where Jack is like, man, I've always wanted to go to Africa. And I'm like, you've been to Egypt. which is in Africa. Jack is like, I'm kind of concerned about the lions. I feel like maybe we should actually like prepare for this mission. And Morgan's like, no, you'll be fine. And he's like, oh, okay then. And so then they're like, I wish I could go to there. And then Morgan's like, best of luck with the lions. And Jack's like, what? So she's now like fucking with these kids. They end up in Kenya and it's during like the Great Migration. And so there's all these animals around. And Annie sees that there are wildebeests that are trying to like cross the river, but they're too scared to do it. And so Annie, because she is the animal whisperer, she's like, I have to go and help these wildebeests. And Jack is like, okay, fine, you go do that. But like, I am going to actually see what the riddle is and like figure that out. The riddle is, I'm the color of gold and as sweet as can be, but beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? So Jack's like, well, I guess I better go find Annie now. As he's like walking through all the animals, he's like reading in the book about all of them. And the like big thing that he learns is that giraffes are like docile and fun, but they can kick really freaking hard. And so lions don't like to go near giraffes because they're afraid of their hooves. And I'm like, this will come back to help them. Jack then hears Annie yell for help. And so this, I think, is where my great fear of quicksand came in as a kid. And I always thought that like quicksand was going to be a way bigger deal when I was an adult and that I was going to have to deal with it on the daily. Because Annie ends up in like quicksand mud and she's like slowly sinking. But the wildebeests are coming like towards her. And so she's going to get trampled in this like quicksand mud. And so Jack's like trying to get her to like reach out for things. And a vulture starts like circling around them. And Jack's like, that vulture thinks that you're at the end. I found that so funny. And Annie's like, oh, that's so rude. I'm not near the end. Go away. I envisioned her just like telling this vulture to like fuck off. But once again, she's 7. With a great tug, they're able to get her free. She's clearly covered in mud, and then she's able to redirect the wildebeests to the correct location so that they don't also get stuck in the mud. At this point, Annie's like, well, I guess we should solve the riddle now. And Jack's like, no, I think first we really need to clean you off because first of all, you smell. Secondly, you're disgusting. And third, no one's going to take you seriously covered in mud. So they're kind of walking around. They run into these hyenas that are like laughing at them. And the fun fact about the hyenas is that they can be massive cowards. And so Jack and Annie pretend to be monsters and they're like, roar, and the hyenas like run away. They try and find some water, and as they're like getting close to a watering hole, they discover their first elephant, which must have just been the most magical experience. I love elephants. And he's like, wow, an elephant. And Jack is like, we need to stop getting distracted. You're really on one today and you are pissing me off. So I'm going to go solve the riddle. Best of luck to you. But then he like feels a spray come from behind him and he turns around to see that Annie is like getting a shower from the elephant and the elephant is like fully washing her off. And then Jack meets his nemesis, which is a small honeybird. I don't know what it is about this bird that sets Jack off. I think it's the fact that he's already pissed off by Annie because she keeps going off on these side quests. But Annie's like, we need to follow this bird. And Jack is like, I can't keep doing this with you. You keep going off. We're not any closer to the riddle. And Annie's like, no, I really feel it that like the bird is the answer. Like we really need to like get closer to the bird. And he's like, you know what? Fine. And he's like, look it up in your book. And Jack's like, no, that little shit, that thing is not in my book. That bird is gross and I hate him. And there's no way he would be important enough to be in my book. Like Jack has actual beef with this bird. He hates this bird. Turns out though, the bird is called a honey finder, and the warriors that are in the area, they will use those birds to like find honeycombs and things. And so Annie's kind of like, oh my God, I love honey. It's like so sweet and great, but wow, it's like really dangerous to have to get it with all these bees. And that's where Jack is like, ding, ding, ding. That's the winner of the riddle. It's honey. They then turn to leave and they see one of the warriors is like standing there looking at them. And the kids are like, hi, oh my gosh, so good to see you. How are you? And the warrior is like, ew, what are you doing here? The kids realize that the warrior might think that they were stealing his honey. And so they're like, no, we promise that like we're just here to like talk about the bird and solve a riddle. They then decide to have a picnic with the warrior to like show good faith. And so they make him a peanut butter and honey sandwich. I wouldn't know. I'm definitely allergic to peanuts, but that does sound amazing. So if you are a peanut butter and honey fan, please let me know because maybe it'll be worth the EpiPen. They have a picnic with the warrior and the warrior's like, okay, that was fun. Bye. And kind of just leaves them there. But now that they have solved the riddle, they go to head back to the treehouse and they realize that there are a bunch of lions now camped out at the tree underneath the treehouse. And they're like, shit. The lions are currently all sleeping and like hanging out because they just had lunch. So now they're like just chilling. And Annie's like, I wonder what they had for lunch. And Jack's like, don't think about it. They're trying to like tiptoe around these lions to get up to the magic treehouse. And then the hyenas almost like set off the lions by like laughing really loudly. And the kids are like, fuck. So this is where Jack's little fun fact comes in handy, because they see that a giraffe is like walking near them. And so they go and walk underneath the giraffe so that they can get to the magic tree house. They climb up into the tree house and they see that honey is the correct answer. So they have now gotten 3 out of the 4 riddles correct. And they make it home, and they have this like whole big debacle about what they're going to tell their mom, because they were heading home for lunch, but they've already had their lunch while they were like in Africa. And so they're like, well, do we tell her that we like had it with a warrior and like this whole thing or whatever? And we'll just tell her that we ate on our way home and that it was a quote long story. And then Jack's like, yeah, it was like 10 chapters long. Wink, wink, because this book is 10 chapters long. These kids are definitely traumatized by these lions on the cover. You can see that their life is flashing before their eyes. God bless them. Well, prep yourself and maybe grab a coat, because tomorrow we're hanging out with polar bears. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Let's talk about polar bears past bedtime. And yes, this morning I am drinking a mimosa. The book kicks off with Jack seeing an owl out his window, and it's like the dead of night. And he's like, what could this possibly mean? Oh, he goes and wakes up Annie, because he's like, Annie understands animals. And she's like, well, the owl says we have to go now, like ASAP, immediately. So then in their pajamas, they head over to the treehouse where Morgan is just chilling, waiting for them. I think she can tell how badly the kids want this, because she goes, are you ready to become master librarians? And Jack is like, well, yeah, because after we complete this quest, we've done your 4 riddles, and therefore we become master librarians. And she goes, almost. She's like, yeah, so anyway, have fun in the Arctic. And Jack is like looking down at his pajamas, and he's like, I'm not doing this shit again. I am not going somewhere where I'm going to freeze to death on your behalf. And she's like, don't worry about it. I'm going to send someone your way. When they get there, they're in their pajamas and freezing cold, and nobody is waiting for them. They read the riddle, which is, I cover what's real and hide what's true, but sometimes I bring out the courage in you. What am I? From a distance, they start to hear barking, and they're like, oh my God, what is that? And it turns out that she had sent one of the tribesmen to come and find the kids, and he has parkas and boots for them. He seems pretty chill. He seems really confused as to why he is there. He's like, I had this weird dream. And Annie's like, yeah, Morgan does that sometimes. So he puts the kids on the dog sled and takes them back to their igloo. When they get into the igloo, this man is kind of like explaining, like, we use all parts of the seal, and like literally every single part of the seal keeps us alive, and we can use every part of it. And Annie, the animal lover, she's like, oh, that's so sad, those poor seals. And then the guy kind of goes on to explain that like they have a ceremony for the seals, and the seals are happy to do it because the seals know that it keeps them alive. And it's kind of just like this relationship between the two. And then he goes, look at these masks I'm making. He's making 2 polar bear masks, because apparently they are going to have a ceremony to the polar bear, because the polar bear is who taught the people how to hunt seals. And Jack's like, a polar bear taught you? Give me some facts. So Jack kind of like starts to disrespect this man in his own home. So the man like explains, and as he's explaining like the process of how to like hunt seals, like the way that they learned from the polar bears, Jack keeps going, yeah, that's a good fact. Yeah, good fact. I see. Until it gets to the point where the guy is like, also like the polar bears taught us how to fly. And Jack's like, yeah, I knew this man was crazy. See, this is why he didn't question why he got a dream about 2 kids in a magic treehouse, because he already believes in Fantasyland that polar bears can fly. The guy's like, all right, well, I guess we'll go feed the dogs then. So he like heads out to feed the dogs, and Annie goes with him, and Jack's like putting all of his stuff away. And then, and I don't know if it was like on purpose, because he says it was an accident later on, but Jack like takes the masks and puts them into his backpack. Jack, baby, what are you doing? You're supposed to be the voice of reason. Why are you now the little kleptomaniac of the 2? Come on, that's Annie's position. He hears screaming outside, and he's like, oh my God, Annie is going to die. Of course, she's gotten herself into something again. And there's 2 polar bear cubs that are sitting there, and Annie's playing with them, because Annie cannot learn to save her life that she should never play with little babies when their scary mothers are around. Jack even makes a point to be like, okay, but where is the mother? Because we've been through this before. But then cut to like 4 pages later, and they're like still playing with the polar bear cubs. They're like sliding around and everything. And they've kind of like left the igloo and the guy behind. So they're playing around, and then they start hearing cracking noises, which I am so sure gave them traumatic flashbacks to the submarine when the glass was cracking. And they realize that they've gone out onto the ice with these 2 polar bear cubs, and the ice is breaking beneath them. From afar, they see the polar bear mom, and she's pissed. Jack then learns a fact from the book that polar bears actually can survive on very thin ice by the way that they distribute their weight throughout their body. So they watch as the mom sort of like army crawls over to the kids, and then she puts the little kids on her back and starts to army crawl away. And Jack and Annie are like, well, that's great that she saved her kids, but like, could she help us? Annie's like, well, why don't we just follow what the polar bear does? Because that's what the guy told us, that they like learned from the polar bears. And this is where I start to get really concerned for Jack's like emotional stability. If we all remember when they were with the ninjas and Jack was told to, quote, be nature, and so he decided to be a rock when he thought that he was going to die by samurai. He played rock so hard that he like truly believed that he was a rock. Same thing happens in this book because Jack and Annie put the polar bear masks on as if to be like, we come in peace, Mama Polar Bear. And when they start like sliding across the ice with the polar bear the way that she does, Jack starts to like envision himself as a polar bear to the point where he blacks out and he wakes up on solid ground again with Annie looking down over him being like, hey, we're safe. You can stop being a polar bear now. Do you understand why I'm drinking a mimosa this morning? Because that shit is crazy. They both look up at the polar bear and they're like, oh, we need to thank the spirit guide because that's what the guy told us that he and his people do. So in true sibling fashion, they continue to like one up each other in how much they start thanking the polar bear. They're like, thank you forever, thank you to the moon and back. And then for some reason, they like twirl around and do a little dance. And the polar bear like stands up on her hind legs and she's just kind of like looking down at them and you can tell she's like done with their shit. At that moment, the northern lights appear, which is one of my dreams, really, to see the northern lights. So reading this, I was like, is this where my hyperfixation came from with the northern lights? Jack and Annie and the polar bears like look up at the northern lights and Annie's like, maybe the bear is a spirit animal. And Jack's like, no, there has to be a scientific reason for this. And then like reads from the book about like what the northern lights are. At this point, they start to hear the like barking of the sled dogs again. And so they turn and the guy is there. And Jack's like, I have your masks. Sorry. But Annie's like, they saved us. We learned from a polar bear. And like Jack also kind of comes to terms with the fact that like polar bears can fly because when they're like sliding across the ice like that, he's like, I felt like I was flying. Okay. The man takes them back to the treehouse. And this is where, once again, I hate Morgan Le Fay. The kids realize that the answer to the riddle is mask because when they put the polar bear masks on, they like gained confidence that they could survive the ice. So they're like, great. And they pick up the Pennsylvania book and they're like, I want to go home. We did it. And then nothing happens. At this point, by the way, they've already given back all of their stuff to the man and he's like left. It's because they gave them back to him of the belief that once they finished the fourth riddle, like Morgan said, they would be able to go home and become master librarians. Instead, though, they're stuck there in the Arctic in their pajamas because there's now another fifth riddle that was never in any sort of contract that these kids ever signed. Not that they signed shit, that they have to fix the riddle before they can get back to Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. The riddle is, look at the letters, the first, not the rest. Discover the place that you love the best. And I don't even need to know like what she's talking about because when she says the place you love the best, we know that it's going to be home, right? But eventually they do figure it out because oyster, echo, honey, and mask, when you put all of those first letters together, it does spell home. They head back to Frog Creek, Pennsylvania, and Morgan is there waiting for them. And instead of like yelling at her for putting them in this predicament that they did not sign up for, they are so grateful and excited about the fact that they get to be master librarians. They get these little library cards and they're little wooden cards that say ML on them. And she says that you are the newest members of the Ancient Society of Master Librarians. Annie asks if they can like go on missions and she goes, no, you have to go home now. And then she like ominously is like, but I'll come back for you soon. It looks like their first master librarian mission is going to be Vacation Under the Volcano, which is Pompeii. So I'm very excited. And in the meantime, thank you for being here and I'll see you tomorrow morning.